Okay, we're up.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Happy to have you here. We'll get started in 1 minute. In the meantime, let's make sure there are no questions around Global Pool. I know that's on everyone's mind. It's been really exciting to start reviewing deliverables and seeing what's happening with the Global Pool applicants. Really fantastic contenders. Hey, Matthew, we're really happy you guys can join. We want to make sure everybody is very clear. If you're in the Global Pool, get your application materials in ASAP, especially any additional deliverables that you may need to do because of being a Global Pool applicant. So you can see the chart. You will go on EWC Accelerate and see exactly what you need to do. It will not take a lot of time, but guys, the sooner you get it in, the easier it is for us to make sure that you're a fit and we can move you into the judges and hopefully get you into our global finalist group that will start the first accelerator in July. Please get your deliverables in ASAP. Carlos, how are we looking as we start thinking about all these amazing Global Pool applications?
Well, I mean, with the newest additions of countries coming in, which are labeled where it says new additions, we've expanded the pool and things are looking well thus far. Although obviously, we're certainly hoping for more applications from these countries. But
I think one of
it's
the cool
adding
things,
breadth to it.
yeah, and I think one of the cool things is actually seeing so many unique ideas coming from every corner of the world and the opportunity for you to engage and start working and collaborating with some of the other competitors. It's right there waiting for you on the platform between the discussion board, even here, right? Posting your questions, looking for partners and collaborators. You don't have to wait to see if you make it to the global finalists or if you make it to the EWC 100. Take advantage of these opportunities now. So welcome to everybody joining us through Facebook and YouTube as well. Keep questions coming in as our wonderful guest speaker today shares his story, because we are going to make sure that this is interactive and fun, so you don't have to wait until the end of the session. Keep your comments around EWC, if possible, in the Q&A, and we can keep the questions and in the chat for our speaker today. So without any further ado, let's get started. We have had such a wide variety of speakers over the last couple of months, and I have to say today is a really special day for me because David Lakoch has actually been a friend for years and is a wonderful success story for my community. I know a lot of times we end up focusing on tech companies because that's what everybody is talking about when you think about high growth and scale and job creation on the ecosystem development side. But David's story is really unique because he is someone who stayed humble, authentic, really focused on team, really focused on a mission and a value set that I think propelled him and his team to incredible heights really quickly. And there was always a strategy in place. He knew exactly what he wanted to accomplish and was just incredibly efficient and diligent in making sure he had clarity, the numbers, and again, this intense focus to achieve. So today's story is really one of resilience. It's one of the highs and lows of entrepreneurship, and having someone who is as, again, just humble about how he's learned over time is a very special treat. And plus, he's just a really great friend. So I'm happy to have you guys meet David Lakoch, founder of Dreamwater, which he exited. We'll hear about that. And an all-around nice, good guy. So I'm happy when good guys win. Welcome, David. Thank you for joining our EWC weekly webinar.
Thank you very much for having me. And hello to the whole community that's listening in here on the Zoom. And I understand it's also on YouTube Live and Facebook Live. So hi, everybody.
Well, go ahead and start. I know you have a presentation, which I love, and
Sure.
It's telling the full story, which I think everybody needs to hear to understand. I mean, so many times we hear about these overnight success stories, and we hear about this company exiting and it feels like it was a snap, a little work over a couple years. This is the reality. All right, all you.
Are you seeing my screen share properly? Awesome. Thanks for having me. And Susan, if everything that you do isn't enough and you want to become my personal PR agent, just let me know, because that was pretty good. All right. So my name is David Lekach, and I made a product called Dream Water. It's a shot that helps you relax and fall asleep. It's at least in its original form, it's a 2.5 ounce, all natural combination of GABA, melatonin, and 5-HTP. That's what Dream Water is. Sorry, but basically, just to back up a little bit. So who am I? I founded Dream Water. I co-founded Dream Water with Vincent, my partner, who you'll see in some of these slides. I went to the Michigan Business School undergrad. I did my JD MBA here at the University of Miami, and I come from a very entrepreneurial family. I'm first generation American, because I know that we have a global audience here. I am first generation American, and my parents came to the country with nothing. So, again, it's really good. I've grown up in this entrepreneurial world, and that you got to go out and get it, whatever that looks like in whatever industry. Again, I was getting into it a little bit, but I forgot that I'm going to go through this part pretty quickly. But basically, Dream Water is a combination of GABA, melatonin, and 5-HTP. Lightly flavored water. It's like the opposite of 5-hour energy, or like an energy shot, right? In a way to sort of explain that to the audience, if you haven't seen it already. We were focused mainly here in the United States from a distribution and presence perspective. At one point, at different points, we've been in Canada, Mexico, Panama, parts of the Middle East, and parts of Asia. But here domestically, what I'm just trying to show is that we worked with and sold through the biggest retailers that you can imagine here in the US, mainly focused on the food, drug, mass channel for a product like ours, and also airport travel retail. So if you ever travel and go to the airports, remember pre-COVID or now, whatever that's going to look like for you after COVID, you should see Dream Water by these, Hudson News type stores in the airports. It does very well there. In May of 2018, so 2 years ago, we did sell the company to a publicly traded Canadian cannabis company for about $34.5 million Canadian. And yes, so usually I would stop my little presentation and say, that's it. That was the whole presentation. Here's everything you needed to know, right? Who am I? We did Dream Water. And then we ultimately had a nice exit. The exit, just for a reference point, was in our 9th year of operations. But that isn't really the whole story, right? And a lot of times, to Susan's point before when she was doing the introduction, is, we see the exit, we see the success story because you see a press release like this, but we don't really know the story and what it took to get there. And I would argue that almost every single one of us, including on the tech side and across every industry, it wasn't sort of a linear straight shot like this. It wasn't always like perfect, and you had a lot of things that you had to overcome along the way. And what I'll share with you now is really the story of Dream Water, and more focused on what I'll highlight along the way that I think matters regardless of your industry, regardless of your experience at whatever, with a little bit of learnings along the way. And if you have any questions, like Susan said, just write it into the chat, and then Susan will interrupt me, as we go, so we don't have to wait till the end to the Q&A. So with Dream Water, one of our biggest challenges was, where are we going to launch this, right? We were in the US. I roped in the guy in the picture with me. I know it's very pixelated. We used to not have smartphones back in 2009, or we had very grainy pictures. So that's the picture that I had as a keepsake. But basically, you'll see a lot of my team here. You'll see Adam. I pulled him in. We were 4 of us. I roped in everybody to start. Adam was our head of marketing at the beginning. The guy here in the white shirt in the shot was my co-founder, who created the very original version of Dream Water. This girl Marilyn ended up running our operations, and this was our first co-packer production facility out in Tampa, Florida. Anyway, so what you're looking at here is, we had this really big challenge. How do you go to market? How do you go to market with a product that has never existed before? Because the idea of a water, there's plenty of liquids or other products that will wake you up, that are energized, coffee, teas, sodas, and what have you, anything with sugar or otherwise. But for us, working with a product that had never existed before, this idea of a water that helps you relax and fall asleep, we had a very tough time at the beginning saying, well, what do we do? And without getting into a huge dissertation, our bottom lines were this. Twofold. One, fish where the fish are. So we had a very reasonable expectation that people who are looking for sleep aids or help going to sleep are probably not walking into 7-Eleven or their local convenience store. They're probably walking into a drugstore like a Walgreens or a CVS or what have you, and making their sleep aid purchases there. So our idea was to focus on that channel because we wanted to be where somebody would expect to find a sleep aid. That was basically the rationale. And then even though we're based in Miami, already in 2009, basically I would always say, I don't need an office. I could work, as long as I have a computer and a cell phone, I could work from anywhere. And that was the same for my team. We had all lived in New York at different points in our lives. If not grown up there, like Adam's from there, Vincent's from New York. And so as we're thinking about where, we said, okay, we're going to launch Dreamwater in New York, in New York City. And then when we thought to ourselves, okay, drugstore in New York City, the answer was obvious. We want to launch with Dwayne Reed. If you know the geography or what have you. But basically it wasn't that we said, hey, we want to launch with that retailer. It was this couple of, thought processes or data points to say, here's how we're going to launch, because the United States of America is huge. And any one of these chains is huge. So how are we going to launch and do this in a controlled way? And our entire mindset at the launch stage, sort of as we got going, and I would argue all the way through, was always to see if what we thought was a viable and good product, right? We thought that there was very much a need for a water that helps you relax and fall asleep, but we needed to go out there and get some validation, not through focus groups. I don't believe in focus groups. That's another conversation. Not through focus groups, not through anything else. Let's just go into a major market, in this case, the major market, and see if we have what we think we have. It was just sort of a thesis, right? And then this was our launch. You can see this in mid-December 2009. We launched with the idea of putting the city that never sleeps to sleep. And just as a note, because if there's a lot of tech people here, you'll hear a lot of different tech people, but it's very true. If you're trying to have perfection in your first iteration, what's the tech terms to use, Susan? Like in your beta version, you're doing something wrong, right? You got to start ugly and you'll make it pretty afterwards, because you don't want to overanalyze it. You want to have this dialed in enough and go enough so that you don't get paralyzed by trying to create the perfect product before you bring it to market. And that was our thing. Again, this was our thesis. Like, what is it? What are we doing? And this just shows you that at the beginning, and why I include some of these slides, is that we did everything. We could not be frivolous, even though we had raised some money, not a huge amount of money, but we couldn't be frivolous with our hiring or things like that. And so whether it was trade shows, whether it was, sales meetings, marketing meetings, or processing things through our own warehouse, it was us that was doing it. It wasn't like we were hiring people even for menial labor. That's not necessarily the best way to go. Again, I'm not going to get into entire sort of tangent there, but there are high value activities and low value activities. And the way to work, we all work hard, but the way to work smartly is really to focus on your high value activities and delegate out the low value activities. But when you're a startup, there's not too many people around, and how do you really delegate, right? It's very hard to do, and you kind of end up having to do everything. For me, the doing everything part was always helpful in so much as that I understood what the different jobs and the different requirements or the different experiences in each job were kind of like. So I looked at it as my opportunity to use my own experiences to empathize and then ultimately lead those different departments. So it wasn't just busy work for the sake of being busy and me feeling good because I was doing a lot of hard work. Obviously with Dreamwater, we got a tremendous amount of press. From the Kardashians, you name it. This is just a very small amount. We were on covers of magazines, on major TV shows. We got a ton of press, and that all felt great. But at the end of the day, we're in business to sell stuff. So then the real question is, what is it doing for you? What is all this press? What are all these hits ultimately doing for you? And in those first couple of years, which I should have highlighted probably back in this slide, is culture is very important, and probably a lot of you have either learned it academically in school or experienced it in your own workplaces or what have you. But I didn't realize it because it wasn't by design. But the best culture I'll probably have ever had in a workplace setting is probably these first years up until about 2013. So 2009 when we were getting started and so on. The culture in our ecosystem, in our little world here, was really amazing. It was very much an us versus the world mentality. I was the elder statesman out of all these people. I didn't really care about what the experience was. I cared more about what you did when you showed up within our doors. My goal with everybody when they were in our doors, and I would say it all the time, again, this was not on purpose. I've learned about culture academically after the fact, not in those initial days, but I was very focused on, and I would always say, I want you to have been better and have grown because of your time here with us at Dreamwater, however long that time would be. And that was really my mentality in this entirety of the time. And that's why I still have a lot of relationships in today's day and age, and why a lot of people, still talk about Dreamwater sort of like their key learning experience. Because my head of sales was my younger brother, and he is this guy right here next to me in the trade show. He became my head of sales at 22 or 23 when he graduated from Babson. And so on and so forth. I didn't really care. I cared more about aptitude and results than I did even experience or education. So from these early years, what is it that sort of stood out to me? What is, and these are some of the takeaways that I have from this. Again, we were building not just a brand, we were trying to create an entire category. And that comes with certain opportunities and certain challenges. But you're only, and I know that this is going to sound kind of weird, but your only real limitation is your mindset. It's how you go about doing it. And what I was very attuned to from the very beginning was, again, that I wasn't just building a brand, I was building an entire category. And that comes with certain opportunities and challenges. One of the things that you have to be able to do, and you don't necessarily know where or when it's going to happen in your own entrepreneurial journey or your own professional journey, but enough of the right team matters from an aptitude perspective. But I will tell you that again, having lived it, if there is somebody that is high performing but bad cultural fit, that is a huge disservice to you and your organization. And so as soon as you start to segment out the people, and I'm sure as I say that, hopefully some of you are thinking, you know what, yeah, Steve is really good at something, and Bob is really good, but he's a huge problem and a huge distraction. I see it all the time, and what have you. The culture is important. It's not just the aptitude of the people. And I would argue that the culture is even more important than the aptitude. You can teach things, but you can't make people function the way you want them to function. They either are that way or they are not. I write this in here, and I include in a lot of our talks by way of this sort of little learnings. How to get out of that paralysis mode is not just to start ugly and then go and see what happens from there. But for me, because it could be on any task and it could be on any project, I always would tell my team, what I would like to see is execution. But I want execution of well-reasoned, well-thought-out ideas, not because I got a huge report or we wasted a lot of time trying to understand it. It just has to kind of make sense and be logical, be it a marketing function, an operation function, a production function, a finance function, or otherwise. But only get into execution mode if you've set up the parameters to learn. By way of a quick example, if I've done a great marketing campaign and to prove out whether it worked or didn't, I had to spend $10,000, but I only spent $1,000. I didn't set up the parameters to learn. If I didn't set up my whatever capturing mechanisms I have to capture the data of whether it was successful or not, what was the point of doing it in the first place? Because what I really want to do is fail quickly or learn quickly to either scale it up and do well, or, which would be the adjustment, or don't do it again and don't repeat it, right? Don't repeat that mistake. So I would actually have a system of cataloging good ideas that we had that didn't work for whatever reason, so that the next time one of us or a new team member had this awesome idea, we can kind of look at it. I remember what happened and here's what was the result, so that we wouldn't have just a philosophical conversation. It was also on there to keep us streamlined and keep us going in the right direction. In my entrepreneurial journey, but I think it would go so far, not because I happen to have a big family. And I had started, and I include my daughter, that's my daughter when she was very little. Dreamwater and my daughter are the same age, and she was my first child. But I wrote it's a family affair because as we go through this, I could tell you that being the number one, being that founder, CEO on your own, the buck stops with you. And it is a very lonely existence. You need to be able to come into your work environment or have your workplace interactions, your professional interactions, with a certain amount of leadership and a certain amount of confidence that even whatever it is that you're dealing with is very complicated, you have to exude some level of confidence so that your team will buy into it and trust. But oftentimes we don't know. And we really can't admit to others, be it our spouse, our mothers, our fathers, or whoever, like, hey man, I don't really know what I'm doing, and I've never really lived through this before. But the key to this is keeping them dialed in and involved, because again, this loneliness is not just loneliness because of the decision making, it's loneliness because nobody was going to outwork me on my team. I'm in there on the weekends, I'm in there at nights, I'm there first thing in the morning, and so on and so forth. And that was just how I did it. But to do that, my wife at the time, I have since gone through a divorce, my wife needed to understand what I was doing. And if I don't communicate it, that would be a problem. I needed to be proactive with my communications to her So I could explain this, so she would understand that when I'm not coming home at 6 or 8 o'clock at night, that it wasn't a fight every single time, just by way of example. When I'm not calling my mom every day to check in with her and say hi, she understands, or at least has some level of understanding why. And this all makes me feel less guilty about the commitment that I have to make to my own process and my own journey, whatever that might look like. And then I will tell you, and I'm very tapped into, I'm a part of a entrepreneurial group called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. It's a global organization with chapters literally all over the world. So high-level entrepreneurs. And so I will even include that peer group of mine. You'd be shocked at how few people really know their numbers, really. And when I say really know their numbers, like there's certain numbers, be it KPIs or just broad-based numbers, that to me, you need to know. And if you don't know them empirically, something's a little off. You're not as dialed in conceptually as you need to be, because numbers is ultimately what matters. And then depending on your business and your business model and where you're at in the process, fundraising is key. How you do your fundraising matters. For me, I looked at it as one of the pillars of my job wasn't just the work side of it, was to develop relationships with VCs, private equities, and other strategic people in my industry as a core part of my job, whether I was raising money or not. When you're trying to raise money, it's hard. But when I've cultivated relationships with PEs over X amount of time and over X amount of years, or strategics, when I want to make an ask of them, I'm not new to them. We've now gotten to know each other. They have some level of comfort with me, which is why we've continued these interactions and these dialogues. And that gives you a higher probability and a higher success at being able to fundraise, which again, for me was important. And for a lot of businesses, it is certainly at the earlier stages of the equation, but even, all the way through. And that's to my note of always be exploring financing options at all times, and so on and so forth. Just one more note, because I'm looking at some of these pictures. When I say it's a family affair, I got to tell you, we spent so much time together that this was our family. We saw each other, and the people that you see in these pictures, we saw each other more than anybody else that we had. And it's okay not necessarily to show vulnerability to, within certain categories or within certain ways to your team, but it really was a family affair. And when I say that, it wasn't empty words. It wasn't just because everybody calls each other fam. It was because we really lived and breathed together. When my brother Joseph and my co-founder Vincent, when we got started, they both, because Vincent lived in New York at the time, they both lived in my parents' house. Just by way of example, they both lived in my parents' house here in Miami when they were in Miami. And then when it was time to move out, because at that point they were in their early to mid 20s. And when it was time to move out of my parents' house, they moved into an apartment together. And a lot of these people that we had to import into Florida because we didn't have the best staff or people to hire from or what have you, when we were importing them into Florida, they ended up living together. So we really, when I say the word family here, it's not just my blood related, it's, all of these people. So my journey is not one of a straight line, amazingness and whatever. And I can start to point to this sort of pivotal moment in this month of September of 2013. I had my highest highs and lowest lows of Walmart in about a 4-month span in 2013. In other words, at the start of 2013, we actually got onto you could feel it in the moment, and I already knew it was happening. We were getting onto that, what's called a hockey stick growth curve. You go from here to here to here, but then all of a sudden it really starts to ramp up like this. And that's what I mean, my highest highs and lows lows with Walmart. We had the right plan, the right program, and all that stuff. But for a variety of reasons, which was out of our control, the program did not go well. We got a front end opportunity, which is by the registers, where 5-hour energy is, and registers at Walmart is the mecca of placement at retail in the entire world. If you get that is the holy grail of the highest level of movement. Walmart in the US has over 100 million customers that walk into their doors domestically into a Walmart. Maybe that's a little dated, but that's how many people flow through a Walmart in the United States of America on a weekly basis. And so when you're on their front ends, it's a huge opportunity. But when they put us at the bottom of their front ends and it was executed terribly by them, we really stood no chance. And that's my highest highs and lowest lows with Walmart. Here's the problem. Walmart was 30% of my business at the time or more. They were not just my key customer, they were by far my key customer. And I loved working with Walmart. You'll hear all these horror stories. Walmart, but I got to tell you something. Walmart will make you, it will also break you. But there is some decency and balance. And I say that having, in my opinion, been fucked by Walmart at the end, or sort of along the way, that I never really got, my opportunity. But I by and large, you'll always hear me have a very positive, even more so than other major retailers, a very positive experience having worked with Walmart all the way through. But that, imagine when we come into September and you're now being terminated off your front end program, and your entire program with 30% of your business or more is at stake. That was this sort of pivotal moment that, what do we do now? Everything that we were killing ourselves for and working for, and all this momentum that we had, and the hockey stick growth curve at the start of the year just vanished. It went away. And in that moment, in that month, I actually lost Vincent as my co-founder. He was my co-founder and COO. He ran all of my ops, production and logistics and whatever. He was the head of that. I also, because he literally pulled a Jerry Maguire moment, like Tom Cruise is highlighting. It literally was kind of like that. He gets up and he says, "Who's coming with me?" And I lost my head of logistics and I lost my head of finance at the same time. And this literally happened to me out of nowhere with zero provocation from Vincent, who was literally like my brother in the moment. And he, I guess it just snapped. We all hit our breaking points in different times. And, I think this was just too much to handle after so much hard work and diligent momentum being built up methodically, to have it sort of all crumble. And it really felt like there might not be a tomorrow in that moment. And then on the personal side, my divorce, and I don't even remember the particulars of it, but my divorce was like the worst month of my divorce was like in this month. I forget why or whatever, but imagine that on top of everything on my personal life, I have this huge amount of distraction when my business is literally at the verge of ending and crumbling. So what do you do from that position? How do you handle that? Because I would say Susan, you might empirically know this better than me, but 9.9 out of 10 would just have to fail and fold and crumble. But I could tell you that when we did the fundraising, there was no bells and whistles. I had no debt in the company. And I had no bells and whistles on the equity. In other words, there was nothing forcing me, and I owned slightly more than the majority. There was nothing forcing me out of my role or out of my position. And the board wasn't replacing me or anything like that. So what basically happened was I would show up to work the next day with my remaining staff. And I would show up to work the next day and we were still in business. And then I would show up to work the next day and we were still in business. And at some point, seemingly fairly quickly, I just said, well, if I'm going to keep coming here and spending my time and processing this and dealing with this, I don't want to just caretake. We weren't big enough. We weren't important enough. And I wasn't making any money. To be clear on that, I didn't take any salary from Dreamwater in the first 5 years. So from 2010 to 2015, I made no money. I was very nice. I had very nice and very supportive parents, because on top of making no money, although I don't live my personal life with any debt, I went through a divorce and lost half of my stuff. So on top of everything, not only was I not making any money, but whatever little stuff I had, it went away in the divorce, let's just say, okay? But I could either feel sorry for me, which is why the mindset at any stage that you're at in your own personal, professional journeys, your mindset is what matters. And I guess something just clicked at me and said, but I don't want to just be here. For just being here, I'll go get a job, I'll get paid and all that stuff, whatever. I want to make it count. And I love Dreamwater. I wasn't passionate about sleep, and I wasn't passionate about beverages. I was just passionate about being able to do something that was having such a tangible impact on ultimately tens of millions of usage occasions in my experience with Dreamwater. And I knew that because I would get all these feedback and these emails, and more than anything, if it was about the money, not that it was that for Vincent and even for Joseph. I lost Joseph in this process too, my younger brother, who was my head of sales, and all of that. I didn't really lose him. I mean, he was still around with me, but I lost it in terms of the drive and the way I understood him in those first, say, 3 years of Dreamwater. The resolve has to be more about money. When Susan introduced me, she said it's a story of resilience and it's a story of perseverance. And it's because it has to be more about that, more than that, because you could have a very good year financially, you could have a bad year financially, but what's going to get you through it all. And for me, most days were not that great, all in all, didn't have to be terrible, but they weren't that great. There was very few moments where I can say were good. That resiliency is going to carry through. For me, it was about knowing the impact I was having on people, regardless of what that meant financially for me. It mattered to me. It spoke to me more than it did for anybody else on my team, especially on my core team. So now that I'm in that position and now that I'm in that scenario, so what do I do? So I said to myself, I want to get back to having fun. I want to get back to having a good time with this stuff. And when did I have the best time? When I was creating. when I was building, and it's not just in product development, and you can see some of the things that we were working on here, be it in infusing dream water with hemp or CBD, as some of you might know. We even played with THC versions and all that stuff. Again, I was ultimately bought by a cannabis company. We made a powder stick version of it that you can see here in the thing. We made a beauty sleep version of it for a nighttime beauty regimen and what have you. So we got back into product development in a big way, but which is one of the things I highlight, but you could be innovative in a lot of different ways, be it in your distribution and merchandising platforms, be it in your operations and how you handle certain parts of operations, and ultimately how you look at business development. So I can get into any one of those things, but I just want to highlight that innovation isn't just, or is product. It's not just in, some cool app that you made or anything like that. It's also how you deliver it, how you produce it, how you package it. Is a big thing. You could, just to illustrate a quick point, when I started to realize my powder product became my number one, and somewhat on purpose, but became my number one seller online. Amazon was my primary online channel. We grew it from 0 to being a multi-7-figure seller on Amazon with a relative single SKU. But if you notice the difference, this was my original powder pack that would go on the store shelves. It's deeper, it's thicker, and it could stand on its own. But when I started working with Amazon and I realized that the bulk of my powder sales were on Amazon and online, I reconfigured the packaging so it would make me a smaller item relative to Amazon standards. And I was able to save tens of thousands of dollars just by redoing my packaging and not being beholden to the retail side package, just by way of example. So I'm just trying to say, you can be innovative and creative on a variety of things that will ultimately push your product forward. And then as a side part, when I was building powder within my own e-commerce system, my outbound freight and fulfillment in that sleek, revised box that is not meant to stand up. It was meant to be packaged correctly from an e-commerce perspective. It was so much more efficient from a cost perspective to ship it out just because I redid the box and I wasn't beholden to my real world retail packaging. And that's part of how I thought about being an omni-channel, multiple channel, real world, online, and otherwise reseller. Being in the airports, just quick other example, being found in the airports was the best marketing activity I ever did, even though it was a sales component. So again, your mindset could be very limiting, but the more open you are to these things, I looked at the airports while they had a revenue generating component. I looked at the airports as a marketing channel for me. That to me was pretty innovative, all the way, right? Or what that could look like from a business development perspective. So I'm going to sort of jump ahead because I'm really trying to focus on some of the highlights and what got us through. So we go through like the worst moment in our dream water journey in 2013. We realized that we're not dead, right? But we did take a hit, so we start to come back like this. The team was relatively stable, although I lost some of what I'll call my A players, my better players, right? And so now it's even more lonely. It's just me. But with all that innovation and all the things that we just talked about, we started to come back up, right? We started to do this back again, not in a hockey stick sense, but we started to come back up. And I should say, just for those of you who, are financially inclined, we did live off of our own cash flows for that last 5 years. So the money that we raised, we ended up raising just shy of $6 million, but it was over the first 2-3 years. And I never had a war chest of cash. That is very little amount of money when you're trying to market a product massively in the United States of America. And I never had more than $2 million. In other words, I never had a war chest of cash. Any mistakes, which I made a lot of, especially on the marketing side, equaled millions of dollars of losses. And you have to be very careful because you have this sort of innate need to go out and build and market and push. But that's also how a lot of companies can go out of business, right? And in a market like the United States, it's even more complicated because we're so big and there's so many touch points and there's so many things that you have to take into consideration that it's hard to make a mark. It's hard to make a splash by way of brand building, absent a true war chest and a huge amount of money. So we're living off of our own cash flows. We're starting to trend back up. We have all this innovation in our pipeline, including things that we never released, like a Dream Water Sport for nighttime muscle recovery and other things that we were working on. We never released the CBD version. We never released the THC version for a variety of reasons. And then all of a sudden, we're in the summer of 2017, and my Canadian distributor, who was not doing a great job at the time, sends me an unsolicited term sheet to buy my business. And funny enough, in that moment, I was thinking about terminating him because I was doing most of the work for him anyway. I was doing all the production here in the US and shipping it up there. I was working on all the regulatory stuff because Health Canada is more complicated than the US with vitamins and supplements. I was doing all the sales calls, so all the all the sales calls, because that was just what we did. I would fly to Toronto. Most of the retailers in Canada are based in Toronto, and I was doing that, and so on and so forth. And so I didn't really need him. I was running all their Amazon business, and I didn't really need him. But I never got to that point because he sends me this unsolicited term sheet. And to fast forward a little bit, I knew he didn't have the money to buy me, but I knew that he had the ability to raise a lot of money. And so I knew that going into this process, but I also knew that going into a transaction process, when most of the business really does revolve around me in this iteration, it's going to be a distraction for me. And potentially, if my team finds out about it, it's going to be a distraction for them. And how do I minimize all of that? But we got to a point around Thanksgiving of 2017. It was just after Thanksgiving where we were able to have a pretty detailed term sheet in place to go and execute upon to try to consummate this transaction. But knowing that he didn't have a lot of money, among other things, and the first bullet point here is finding your leverage, I knew who I was dealing with. But I also gave him a very truncated time period, not because I mandated it, for the reasons that I just said. I didn't want the distraction. I didn't want it to go on too far. And if we're going to do this, let's do this. And if not, let me move on and focus on real work. He seemed comfortable with that time frame. He seemed comfortable with a quick time frame. So it was like right post Thanksgiving, start of December of 2017. Our first due date was really February 15th, 2018. So the deal was supposed to close within 2 months. I wasn't afraid of that because on a diligence side, I was always prepared. I was always thinking ahead. I'm very organized digitally. So when I got a 17-page due diligence checklist from them, I was able to turn that 17-page due diligence checklist around in a day and a half, while I happened to have been in Chicago preparing for and then executing a sales meeting that I would have once or twice a year with Walgreens. So I just want to point out that that's how quickly I was able to turn around, because I was ready, because I was prepared, because my financials were clean and clear and easy to understand. All of my documentation was properly detailed and properly saved in all these files that I can recall and pull up, and so on and so on and so on. I was so ready for it that part happened quickly. And by being ready subconsciously, the receiver of this information, be it the auditors and the investors and all that, when they would see how tight I was, that gave them a little bit more assurances, even on a subconscious level, that I'm really tight and what I'm telling to them is very transparent, real, and true. Because in our instance, without getting into too many details, they were buying the company. They weren't buying assets from us. A lot of times in acquisitions, the acquirer will want to buy the asset to not incur either known liabilities or unforeseen potential liabilities, like that if somebody might have consumed a dream water and it killed them or hurt them 6 months before closing and they only bring it up right now, or something along those lines. That would be an unforeseen circumstance. While we were doing that, and because I knew what he really needed is the ability to have more profitability. He was buying dream water from me and reselling into the Canadian market. He didn't have enough margin in there. I was basically producing it for 50 cents a bottle, and he was buying it from me for $1 bottle, and he had to make his math work while doing all the things to support the retailers and market in territory and so on and so forth. So it was not a very profitable proposition for him. So because he didn't have the cash, it's not like he sent me a proof of funds or anything like that. We built into that initial term sheet that was very detailed, we built an entirely secondary term sheet that says, if we can't consummate a deal by February 15th, we would shift to a licensing model wherein for the next 3 years, he would be able to buy dream water from me at a cost plus basis. So cost plus, and you could set that up whatever you want, say 10%. So he would be able to buy dream water from me at 60 cents. If it cost me 50 cents and then plus 10%, so an extra 10 cents for the general labor or whatever that we have, he'd be able to buy it from me at 60 cents instead of $1. By fronting me cash up front. And why that would matter for me, remember, I was living off my own cash flows. When I had a little bit more cash and I was progressively being able to save more money, so I had a little bit more of a cash cushion. When I was doing all that, if he was able to accelerate me money, I already kind of would have booked, and the money that he was going to accelerate me was sort of booking our gross profit, in the previous year, kind of looking forward for 3 years. I at least was able to accelerate cash without taking on debt, without taking on investors, and without giving away an entire territory in perpetuity. I was able to structure this as a backup to what happens if he doesn't have the money to buy me. And that's what I mean by give yourself options, and ultimately deliver what he was looking to do. And it was a really creative, innovative, remember, always be innovating. To me, it was a very innovative way to raise capital without messing with my cap structure. or putting on debt obligations that I don't know if I would or would not be able to meet. So we're sitting there, I'm doing everything that I need to do, but I already knew going into the February 15th deadline that this probably wasn't going to happen because you either feel it or you don't, because we hadn't progressed enough the purchase agreements and all of those reasons. February 15th instead of February 28th. Why I set February 15th is because February 15th is my birthday. So in this really weird way, why I picked the middle of the month is, and I didn't tell them that is that it was my birthday. So instead of being a very huge celebratory event on my birthday, my 38th birthday, it woke up to a phone call from Steve saying, I'm not going to be able to buy you, but I need more time because I think I still can. Please, 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 please. Right? Well, Steve, we've already contemplated it. And this was never run as like a process. I never bid this out. I always believe a bird in the hand is pretty good. And I've interacted with a lot of bankers, but I never ran a process. I was happy with the deal and the constructs or whatever, and I wasn't going to press my luck. So I went all in there. I didn't have other bids to compete against or to negotiate from or what have you. But as much as it hurt me, because some part of me was mentally checked into selling this and like, what an amazing outcome and what have you. As much as it hurt me, I said, Steve, we've already contemplated this. Let's just execute on the licensing plan. That hurt me a lot, but I said that with absolute authenticity and resolve because I needed to do that in that moment. And I understood who Steve was in this back and forth. And he needed to believe me that I was not going to extend. He comes back. I need to extend. Please let me do this. I'm not interested in the licensing deal because he mentally was so committed to this purchase that he couldn't let it go either. Long and the short of it is, I said, how much more time do you need? He says, I need a month, maybe 2. I said, no problem. We executed an amendment and I should say, at the start of, kind of a big part, but at the start of the entire process, I was able to, when we signed the term sheet, signing the term sheet also equaled that he paid me hundreds of thousands of dollars as a deposit, not as an offset against my purchase price. It was for the time, effort, and labor and the accountants and the lawyers that I was going to hire in case the deal doesn't go through. It wasn't escrowed or anything. Upon signing of that initial term sheet, several $100,000 came my way. So there was already cash that transacted this way. And what I'll analogize that to is that it was like fishing, right? What I did was I threw my lure out and I kind of hooked it. But if you've ever fished, if you don't reel it in right, or you reel in too fast at the beginning, your fish will get off the line and it'll go away. There is a process to how you hook them and then ultimately bring them into your boat that is where the secret sauce of fishing is. And so what I knew here is that he was already financially committed to it. He was already really wanting to get it done because he was mentally committed to being the owner of Dreamwater and the CEO. And so I said, no problem, pay me for the extension. So we worked it out. There was a $100,000 extension from February 15th to March 15th. And if March 15th rolls around, because he needed maybe up to 2 months, if March 15th rolls around and he's still not closed, at his discretion, he could give me another $100,000. Again, not offset against anything. This is money that was free and clear for me. So it wasn't to escrow, it was coming into me. So again, creative fundraising, what have you, that no matter what happens, even if this deal doesn't happen, I got X amount of dollars out of the whole process and equation. And sure enough, March 15th rolls around, the money's not there. It's not closed. So March 15th rolls around, I get another $100,000. And the entire time that I was doing this, because my dad understood the circumstances, my dad was like my chairman. He also worked out of my office. He was a very important mentor to me, not just as a father, but as I was going through this whole thing. My dad would say, there's no way this deal's ever going to happen or anything like that. But every time I got a little bit more money, in other words, I reeled it in a little bit more, I knew, because just fast forwarding, by the time that we closed the transaction, I had $750,000 free and clear, whether this transaction would have happened or not. Just think about that for a second. And it was not offset against anything. And so every time I did this, honestly, the most fun part for me would be to pop my head into my office and say, I got another $100,000 today. And he would laugh at me and say, you're still not going to close the deal, right? Because it's bullshit. And sure enough, here we are, and it's the end of April, and there's a lot more that goes into this story, and I'd be glad to, with full transparency, answer whatever you'd like here or otherwise. But we're coming here, and again, it was announced on May 3rd, but it was supposed to be announced on May 2nd. And this goes to this fourth bullet point. It's not done until it's done. And I'm sure you've heard that, but let me explain to you what that means. I was our primary attorney. I am a bar certified attorney, and it's not the right way to go. You don't want to be your own attorney. And by the time I layered my own attorney into the deal to really handle with the nuts and bolts of the purchase agreement and some of the other stuff that had to be generated, my message to him was don't fuck this up, because it was already a done deal. We were signed, sealed, and delivered. Just don't mess it up legally, okay? And so it's me, my attorney, and the primary attorney, because I had two massive Canadian law firms doing different parts of the diligence, relative to me and relative to my, because they also bought the Canadian counterpart, the distributorship in Canada. So there was the things, and I'm on with the primary attorney of this entire equation on the purchaser side. And it is like midnight, and the entire plan was approve the press release that can be taken into the board meeting on May 2nd, so that the board meeting can meet, ratify on the purchaser side, ratify, and then we will announce. And I wanted to make sure that I announced to my company, to my team members, and my family before they read about it in a Google alert, or before they read about it on the news, or before they heard about it from somebody else in the industry or what have you. So I send out. So it's that night. It's May 1st at night in 2018. It's like midnight. We're about to hang up the phone, and I made one or two legitimately, otherwise you would never have thought about it, stupid jokes about, wow, we're there and I can't believe they got it done. And I made a joke about, them paying me a little too much for the deal, and whatever. It was something like that. And on Tuesday on the May 2nd in the morning, I sent out, because not all of my company and not all of my key investors and people that I wanted to be on that call that I told to, or my mom or whatever, they don't all work out of my office. So I send out a company-wide memo, which I haven't done really in forever, if ever, saying we're going to have an all hands on deck meeting at some point. I can't tell you when, but just be available from like 10 Eastern to 2 p.m. Eastern, because it'll probably happen within that window, or what have you. And of course, that time comes and goes. And that I even called an all hands on deck meeting was like scary for people and all of this stuff. And it turns out that board meeting was not just to rubber stamp this thing. And my stupid joke about them paying too much almost blew the entire deal when it was done, signed, sealed, and delivered, minus the board approval, all because I made a stupid joke. But somehow we were able to overcome that. And on May 3rd, but I legitimately on May 2nd, instead of having a huge party and assuming that, and I had a party planned and everything, it all got canceled. And the truth is I drank a half a bottle of whiskey with my two brothers and just used them for whatever support I could, them and Johnny Walker. And it really felt like, oh my God, I fucked this up. I was masterful until this moment. And that stupid fucking joke, David, why did you have to say it? Or anything like that. So it's not done until it's done, because then all of a sudden on May 3rd, and at this point I hadn't slept in a while, on May 3rd, I get the phone call. It's on. I didn't call on a hands on deck meeting, but then I sent an email. Everybody get on the phone now. And this is what happened.
David, you should explain what's going on here, because there's a little bit of a lag and there's no audio.
Oh, there's no audio?
Nope.
Oh, well, the whole point is the audio. So
no, I know.
If there's no audio even to like the streamers on YouTube or Facebook, because this is kind of a powerful thing.
It's very powerful. I don't hear anything. Carlos, do you hear anything?
Unfortunately, I can't.
Oh, well, I'm sorry about that. But basically what you'll see is, or what you would have heard is that that this is me telling my company, and you, well, I was about to say you would have just heard, but I was basically, this is me literally telling my company. My dad was videoing it, because I was like, jump into the room and just capture this on video. It was grainy, it was shitty, and my dad's not the best cameraman. So for posterity purposes, I didn't have to cut this video down. But this is me effectively announcing to my company that, here, I'll just put it on the screen here, but it was effectively announcing to my company this press release is about to go out. Sorry. And then I went around some things, and that's all I really felt the need to do in that moment, was just to say thank you, obviously to my team, but really thank you to my parents, who I had my dad in the room and my mom on the call. It's just what came out. This was not scripted. And what you would have also heard me say was, I haven't slept in legitimately 3 days at that point. It's very hard as a human to not sleep, and it was, the night before it was because I was miserable and I thought I fucked up the whole deal. The night before that, it was because I got off the phone and I stopped reviewing the press release, the draft of the press release, probably around 1 a.m, and I had to be awake at 5 or 6. So I just didn't get much sleep out of excitement. So you're experiencing every range of every emotion that you could possibly experience. And in this moment, I actually started crying, and you see that on the video. I started crying and I couldn't really stop crying. I was able to control myself at some point, because it was just such a seminal moment, not because I was selling my baby, so to speak, but it was just what us, the team, the people on the call, the investors, and all these people that gave a shit, that lived this journey with me. I wanted to share it with them. And it started with thanking my parents because of everything that I've alluded to, and so much more, even on this call. And then that appreciation and gratitude goes a step further. In my actual deal, I had negotiated a certain pool of money that was not meant for my shareholders, and it was not meant for me. I could have done whatever I wanted. I had full discretion over this little pool of money, but I actually negotiated into my deal that they tried to renegotiate away from me a million times, because they said, you have nothing invested into that. Like, why not just give that up and we can go through or what have you. And I literally just, I was able to show appreciation. And what that meant in terms of my core team was that within reason, every one of my sort of key or actual operating team members, I tried to get to 1 year's salary as a bonus without telling them that I was doing that. They had no expectation. They had no reason to know that that was going to happen. Even the cleaning lady in my office got $1,000. So the minimum that anybody got at all was $1,000. A cleaning lady, even some of these consultants that we had, or 1099s, like my IT guy that is not full-time for me or whatever, everybody got something. And internally, I tried to get to matching about 1 year's salary. I couldn't do it all the way, but in most cases, that was hugely impactful, life-changing money for a lot of these people that tend to live paycheck to paycheck, even though they're making X and whatever. It was hugely life-changing. But the most important thing was I wrote them letters. And if you had to ask me what was my best part of this entire experience, some of it, if I'm going to be honest, was saying I told you so, some of the letters and all that. But really, that wasn't in my headspace at all, and I never really cared. And there's very few that I even went to say, hey, I told you so. But the best part was the letters and the feedback on the letters. So in the letters is where I told people where they were making their money, but they didn't even give a shit about that. And there was all this crying and this appreciation back both ways, because we lived it. We grew up together. We spent 9 years of our lives, at least for this remaining team, 5+ years, if not longer, and so on and so forth. And I just can't express that was the best part of it. It wasn't even writing checks back to investors, taking in my own check, looking at my own bank account or anything like that. That was just another day for me. Not because I didn't have that or anything like that. It's just another day. It was just understanding and showing that appreciation was the best part for me. These are some of the things, and this slide is called I'm Not Doing Retirement Right, because as I'm sitting here, I volunteer. I take on a lot of projects that I probably don't need to do. Like, I'm here trying to help my entire kid's school, triage, just because, right? But triage in a war room type setting, how we can even come back in real world. You're talking about pre-kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, over 1,100 students that you have to contemplate this on. This stuff isn't easy. But so I do some of these things or whatever, and I think a lot of that has to do with I like mattering it, more than anything else. But the things that allowed me to be great, I had no seller's remorse. It was a good deal. I thought it was a really good outcome, all things considered, including with all of the ups and downs of the business. It was about time. I had invested a lot of my time and life into this thing. But in the entirety of the process, a lot of times in my EO group, in my entrepreneurs organization group, we'll do exercises like how much of your identity is wrapped up in your business. And I would be the one answering, I think, more than anybody else, 100% of my identity. I would go to dinners with friends. I would go to whatever. And because I would be on TV, or I would have, my product in the airports or in Walgreens or in Publix or in whatever, everybody always wanted to talk to me about what I was doing, even though I just wanted to have a nice dinner socially. And so 100% of my identity was tied into this. And you would say, well, isn't that hard to sell and then no longer be in control? But for a variety of reasons, again, that I won't get into right now, I was very good and clear with my journey. And that was very important, so that at least I didn't have this remorse that it wasn't mine anymore, what have you. It's so easy to say that you have to have some work-life balance, but I could tell you that when you're in the grind and all that stuff, and everything seems so mission critical and so important, you know, you give up some of the life part of work-life balances. At least I did. And my mentor, my professional mentor, who taught me a lot, was the head of sales from Johnson & Johnson before, you know, working with me. And he, not as a W2, he was an investor and a mentor to me. And I remember one of the first things he said, and it stuck with me for forever. He says to me, I wish I would have done with my kids what I am now doing with my grandkids. And that always stuck with me. And whatever that might mean for you, and if you hear nothing else other than that one statement from me in this entire thing, please remember that. I wish I could I would have done with my kids what I am now doing with my grandkids. And then for whatever it's worth, the other lovely thing that I've heard and felt about that was kids spell time, Love. So keep that in mind. Kids spell time, Love. Oh, I said that backwards. Shit, I was trying to be impactful. It's kids spell love, Time. Sorry, I totally fucked that up. But kids spell love, Time. And then, you know, part of how I've dealt with this psychologically is that I've given myself some amount of room to breathe. I'm a grinder. I don't have hobbies. I don't have any of that stuff. I'm a grinder. I like to be in the trenches. I like when I'm needed and important. That's work that I've done on myself to understand myself better. But I've also proactively and consciously given myself it's an okay, because I know what it takes to jump into this journey. And it takes a lot, right? So if I'm going to make that kind of commitment, I want to make sure it's for the right reasons. I'm not just going to jump in for a paycheck or anything like that. I know that we're up against time here a little bit, but just some of these big things that sort of stand out to me is starting, and I highlight that in clear, sort of these big takeaway moments, and then I'll be done after the slide. But it's starting that's hard. Starting, and that's the same thing with a project. It's the same thing with your business, with your journey. It's the starting, because there's so much uncertainty and there's so much unknown, and there's so many what ifs and whatever. So starting is hard. Just remember, just start ugly. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just start. Get yourself in action, hopefully with learning parameters set up so that what you're doing is going to allow you to evolve and make that process better. Run your own race. When I started Dreamwater, I used to make you sign NDAs. So I would even tell you what a non-disclosure agreement so that I can even tell you what I was working on. You'd say, what are you going to pitch me? And I say, well, sign an NDA and I'll tell you, because the idea had never existed. I had never seen it, found it anywhere online, in the real world, or wherever, this idea of a water that helps you relax and fall asleep. And then shockingly, I launched with Dwayne Reed in mid-December 2009. And I guess there was another David Leckoch somewhere who was thinking about the same thing and actually getting in action and executing it. And Dwayne Reed did me the favor of launching an entire other brand, Sleep Aid. So now it went from 0 to 2 in one retailer in the entire country. Okay. So I guess some of the same thought processes by February. So within 2 months, I already had a second product on the shelf that was conceptually like mine. And it's so tempting to be like, oh my God, and what are they doing? And what are we going to do? So I'm not saying that you don't discount what's going on over here, but there's always going to be a lot of noise. And the better you are able to focus and keep your blinders on, you see, I can't really look in my periphery or stuff like that. It does not mean that you do not create times where you put down your blinder and make sure you're learning. Maybe they're doing some things that you could iterate on and it's better for you and all that stuff, whatever. But within reason, if what you're doing is logical, makes sense, and the data that you're generating is proving the yeses or the nos, and you're getting enough positive momentum, run your own race. There's always going to be somebody richer than you. There's always going to be somebody poorer than you. There's always going to be somebody happier than you, somebody that is less happy than you. Focus on you. Focus on what your journey looks like, what it's supposed to be, and all of the good and bad that comes with that. My uncle once told me, especially when I was in the grind and in the shit and everything felt terrible, one of my uncles once told me, who had his own much better exit than mine. He's really like an older brother to me. I remember he told me one time, hey buddy, these are the good old days. All of this, you're not going to remember the sale. You're not going to remember what it felt like to have money in your pocket. You're not going to remember any of that. You know what you're going to remember? That night that you were in the office until 2 a.m. with 3 guys or 3 girls or whatever, working on that presentation so you can get to the trade show the next day, so you can get to your Walgreens meeting, real early. And that's what you're going to remember. And it's true. So be present for the good and for the bad and all of that. But take a moment to breathe. Right? Take a moment to understand that what you're doing right now was interesting or cool, including celebrate celebrate along the way. I was terrible at that. I never took any. We sold Walmart without getting into that story because we're out of time, but we sold Walmart and that was just another day for me. And now that I know what selling to Walmart even means, whatever that initial program is or whatever, and that was my first national retailer. I went from Duane Reade in New York City to Walmart on a national basis, which was not part of my projections, by the way. It was literally just another day for me. It was another day for me in Northwest Arkansas and figuring out how to come back to Miami, but it was just another day. And I think that that's a mistake. Real quick, and I'll try to get through this real quick, but this idea, human nature is such that we're going to try to fix the things that aren't working instead of focusing on what is and doubling down on what is. My dad said to me, if you have a store, a Walgreens store that is selling 1 unit per store per week, and you have another one that's selling 10 units per store per week, and you take all of your resources, mental capacity, financial resources, human resources, and all that, and you're able to achieve 100% growth, do you want to do it off the store that's doing 1 unit per store per week or the store that's doing 10 units per store per week? And the answer, I hope, is self-evident. You want to do it here. Because if I get 100% growth out of the store that's 10 units per store per week, I got 10 more units of sales incrementally. And again, human nature is such that we focus on the negatives. I would say focus on what is working. Focus on what and double down on that, and then triple down on that, and then quadruple down on that. Because that's how you're going to get that incremental growth. Again, I get 100% growth out of a store that's doing 1 unit per store per week. I got to 2 units. Yay. Didn't move the needle. Isn't impactful at all. And, for me, it's about being resourceful and all that stuff. For me, I just wrote, again, I explained earlier in this talk, I wasn't passionate about these things, but I was really moved and impacted by the impact that I was having. I guess I was passionate about the impact that I was having. I was able to be perseverant and I was able to be persistent. And that's why I'm having this conversation with you today. And I'll leave it with this little quote here, whatever, because I thought of it, so I credited myself. But, if you have an idea and the resolve to chase your own dream, I'm not telling you that it's going to be easy, but I am telling you it's going to be worth it. And that's not because I sold, just to keep that in mind. It's about the journey and what the experience was. So with that, I will stop and take any questions that you may have, or I don't know how we're doing with time here, but I almost did that. Actually, I did it in a little less than an hour because you kicked it over to me like at 3:10. So.
Well, we do have quite a few questions coming in from the different channels. So can you explain how you approached understanding and later optimizing your supply chain for your product?
Beautiful. So Dreamwater is a very hard product to make. And I know that's going to sound weird or crazy, but I'll explain it quickly. When we started, there wasn't to be all natural, we didn't use any chemicals or preservatives. And we knew that we didn't want to make it. The original version of Dreamwater was this like 8-ounce bottle. And there was a lot of options to what's called hot fill. We had to be able to fill these plastic bottles at 180 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. And for those reasons, the plastic would melt if you didn't have it. And so I walked into my first co-packer's facility in New Kensington, Pennsylvania. I could not even point to you where that is on a map, but it's because I was able to find that they were able to run shots in a hot fill capacity. And I found this bottle that became the Dreamwater bottle that you see here, that is mass produced. And some part of me wanted to have a customized bottle for me and all that stuff. I ended up becoming the biggest consumer of this bottle that you see of Dreamwater. I ended up becoming the biggest consumer of that bottle from Amcor, which is one of the largest bottle manufacturers here in the United States, if not the largest. But I decided to simplify this and just keep in mind that my mindset, my lens, and I've referenced mindset a lot. My lens of looking at this stuff was I'm in the business of selling Dreamwater, not making it, but I have to make it too, right? And I didn't want to turn over a lot of things to what's called co-packers. Co-packers are the people that can actually manufacture the product for you. And I always worked on it domestically. I did not import from anywhere else. I produced locally. The bottles were blown locally. Maybe every once in a while the caps were flown in internationally, but by and large, I was 100% a US American product. And going through the process, I could tell you that I was able to find that bottle. And a lot of times it was about resourcefulness. Because when I didn't like that first co-packer experience that I had in the very initial run, and thank God, how did I find my second co-packer, which was in Tampa, was because I called Amcor, who had that one bottle that I happened to find in this one co-packer's facility that was allowing me to conceptualize this not as an 8-ounce bottle, but as a 2.5-ounce shot, which gave me more selling opportunities like on the front ends and stuff like that, by the register areas of stores. Like you don't see an 8-ounce Coke or an 8-ounce bottle sitting at the register of a Walgreens or an airport retailer, what have you. So I find this bottle and I call the bottle manufacturer and say, where else do you ship this bottle to? They say, oh, there's this facility in Tampa. So that's the resourcefulness. So I find this facility in Tampa. I go over to the facility in Tampa. They were my co-packer for the first year. Right when I'm getting started with Walmart and I have to ship for Walmart. Here's the thing. You have ship by and arrive by windows. It's very precise what you need to do. The warehouse or plant next to my co-pack facility in Tampa had a fire. And the soot of that fire came into the air ventilation systems, and the FDA, because ours is an FDA regulated facility, shut down my facility for a month. I warehoused all my product in that facility, right? I should take a step back. But anyway, so I warehoused all my product in that facility. And so I was effectively up a creek without a paddle because they would not release product that was already passing all the tests, whatever, because of this soot issue of the fire next door, not through my facility. But by that point, I had already, even though I did not have enough volume to justify and bring down the price at this Tampa co-packer, I forget what really popped into my head as to why I needed it. But thank God, about several months before, not more than that, I had found this other co-packer, again, talking to my Amcor relationship, because there were certain that one I found because of a consultant. I actually brought a consultant. There were that's why I did it. There were certain deficiencies in this co-packer at Tampa's production line that needed to be remedied. But my guy says, but I found this one guy in Dallas, this one co-packer in Dallas that I like a lot better. This is the consultant speaking. So long story short, I had started a process, and basically what I would do, I was doing about 10 production runs a year. I was as just in time as I could be. I didn't want to sit on a lot of finished inventory. It had a shelf life and so on and so forth. So I was in about 10 production runs a year. And what I would do is I would kick 2 production runs to my primary facility and then 1 production run to my secondary facility so that they knew how to run it, that we had a rapport, that we already existed, and I built in that redundancy. Had I not built in that redundancy, I might have lost my Walmart relationship right when that fire happened. So I think that the redundancy in critical points of be it with humans or be it with processes or manufacturing or you name it, what it might be. In other words, if you said there's a lot of tech people, if it's an engineer, I always kind of want to have 2 engineers so that if that engineer gets killed by a bus or thinks I'm terrible and leaves or whatever, I'm not left up a creek without a paddle, so to speak, right? So I believe very much in building the redundancies. And then also, again, keep in mind, what is your job? I define my job as selling Dream Water, not making it, but I had to make it too, even though it was co-packed in a different facility. I hope that was a good answer.
That was a great answer. Okay, next up. How did you prioritize hiring when you finally decided to grow your team, especially after so many core elements of your team left at the same time?
Well, my first, what I call frivolous hire was somebody in the warehouse, because especially if you've ever lived in a humid climate in the summers, I would literally walk outside, be drenched, or walk into the warehouse, be drenched, and then walk back in. It was not the best for a workplace environment. Again, it's about being resourceful and unapologetically so. And I want to say that again, it's about being resourceful, unapologetically so. My technical first hire, I brought me and my team of 4. We were a team of 4, my brother, Vincent, and Adam. But almost immediately, and while that was happening, I actually stole Marilyn, the girl in that first picture in that Tampa, that was my head of logistics. I stole her from my dad. My dad didn't realize that I was stealing her in the moment, neither did I. But by the time that we were growing and my dad didn't need her as much, or she was able to do that stuff for him pretty easily, and she was really dialed in with us, she was my first hire. She didn't cost me anything, not in that moment. And then my second hire was because we moved into this warehouse instead of this little house that we were working out of. And we just had more things that were being shipped out or being received. And I didn't want to keep interrupting my day. Again, this idea of you should, in as much as you can, focus, first understand what are high value activities for you. What is a high value activity for you could be a low value activity for somebody else and vice versa. But what are your high value activities where if you spend your time and mind share and all that focus on this, your results will be more incremental than something else. So for example, if I am also doing my warehousing work, am I working at my best? I'm working hard, but am I working at my best capacity to grow the business? Is me being in the warehouse somehow going to be accretive to selling more at Walgreens? No. So that's what I mean, that if you can delineate and differentiate between the two, that's what started to tell me what I needed to do by way of hiring. So that's why I'm answering that in a hiring question, because where do you start? I never had extra money. I didn't pay myself for the first 5 years of Dreamwater, because whenever I had an extra 20 grand, 50 grand, or 100 grand, that to me meant, let me hire somebody else. Let me hire somebody else, even at the expense. But I was able to do that, to be fair, because I had very supportive and helpful parents and some life savings, because I was responsible growing up. I didn't blow it on cars and, partying in South Beach or whatever the case might be. And so it wasn't a methodical, it wasn't by design. It wasn't that initial hiring phase. It was just sort of like, what do we need? Oh, and then we needed an accountant. My mom was doing the accounting for us, but she's not the best accountant. She's trustworthy. We're not the best accountant. I need to know my numbers, and I'm data driven. So next hire was an accountant, and that's just how we went, right? And really your lens could be, what is a high value activity, low value activity? Low value activity doesn't mean that it doesn't have to happen or that it's not important. It's just relative to you or you and your core team. And then that's maybe a lens to do that. I didn't hire so much right away, certainly not for that first year in 2014, right? Because the disaster of the end of 2013, because I didn't have the money. Remember, I lived off my own cash flow. It was one of those things where I just have to do more. That's what it felt like in the moment. I did hire because as I started to come back up on the upswing, my cash flows were better and things like that. But I was able to work with the team that I had and so on and so forth. So the hiring that I did it wasn't big hiring. It never was necessitated. And I was really dialed into sort of what was critical, right? And focusing on my cash flows, and whenever possible, because even though I lost millions of dollars on marketing, I was always trying to spend more money on brand building and marketing. So I was allocating to that more than anything else whenever I had extra free cash.
Couple more. What are the biggest obstacles you face selling online compared to retail?
Oof, I'd love to hear that question. Like, which one do they think is harder, online or retail?
I think everybody thinks retail is harder, but
retail is harder.
And please go into that though. Explain pros and cons, I guess, is the best way to think about it.
So when I started Dreamwater in 2009, 2010, it was a very different world. We didn't have Instagram. Facebook didn't look the way it looked. I'm not even sure if Twitter existed. Maybe Twitter existed. Really, the entirety of digital marketing, and Amazon was still nascent. I mean, I know that's going to sound crazy because they started in the 90s, and I'm saying in 2010 they were still nascent, but Amazon is not the Amazon that you know of right now. And I think that if I would have started Dreamwater maybe even like a year or two later, I would have been digitally native and then focused on coming into the real world. And everybody who I know that is digitally native, on their e-commerce or Amazon, they always have these ambitions of going into the real world. I did it the other way. I was in the real world selling to these real world retailers, massive real world retailers, and small ones and regional ones, and you name it, and all over the world. And there's a lot of pros and cons with them. Look, I go to one Walgreens, and one buyer that I'm able to convince and sell or whatever will push me into 8,000 stores. But here's the key. It's not about getting in those stores. It's how you're in those stores. When they would put me at the bottom of a sleep aid shelf and whatever, my turns, what's called an inventory turn, the sell-through rate of those bottles was very, very minuscule. And let's also level set this. For me to do $1 million in revenue, I have to sell about probably 700 to 750,000 bottles at my selling price, by and large, at wholesale, to do $1 million of revenue. Let me explain to you something. That equals a lot of turn. Just $1 million worth of revenue, 750,000 bottles. It's not your sell in, it's your sell through. And if your sell through isn't there, how are you ever going to hit economies of scale? And so it's about your sell through. But when I was able to put a Dreamwater at the register of a Walgreens or at the register of a Hudson News in the airport, my sell-through rates were better than anything that I could ever credibly project. I knew the data, but if I took the data and I tried to tell the buyer, put me here and I'll go from selling 1 unit per store per week to 20 units per store per week, they'd be like, really? Because most items don't move like that. And not every item is meant to be on the front end. I'm using Dreamwater, just to be clear, I'm using Dreamwater as an example. You're never going to sell shampoo on the front ends unless maybe it's a beauty retailer or what have you. You're never going to sell, stomach pain medication on your front ends, on your registers or things like that. It's about finding what that means for you, about being in the store the right way. Maybe it's where you are on the shelf, adjacent to who. Maybe there's other in-store opportunities like being on what's called an end cap, a side wing. There's a lot of other places that you can be, but it's about how you're in these stores that ultimately will dictate your success. No amount of marketing will ever get sell through when you're at the bottom of a sleep aid shelf. No amount of marketing. I've proved that to the tune of millions of dollars. Anyway, so it's about being in them. But that same one, and so one person, here's the pro. One person decides, and God forbid gives me a good program or the right program, I just hit it to the tune of 8,000 stores with Walgreens. Now it's more than that. But that same person can cut me off of 8,000 stores immediately. And that same person could say yes to me being on the shelf, not being in the store the right way, and not yes to a better program or other things that I need that buyer to do for me. So that was there's pros and cons. And here's the other con about selling into real world retail. Most buyers in most categories will have one review period and one what's called a planogram reset period. So if that review period, the time where I go to meet with Walgreens is in, I'm making this up, is in March, and I created Dreamwater and had this huge idea and thought, and I didn't even know that their review period was in March, and I go to them in April, unless you're Procter & Gamble that can do what's called cut-ins, in July, I have to wait until the next March's review just to pitch Walgreens. Because no matter what I do, they're not going to change their planogram across 8,000 stores just to put Dreamwater on the shelves. They might do it for a Johnson & Johnson or Procter & Gamble launch, but not me. And so that's a huge issue too. And if for whatever reason that buyer in that moment doesn't agree with me, I have to wait another year to get into Walgreens, and so on and so forth. Whereas in an online setting, and that's where my mindset shifted to there. I loved Amazon and I loved working through my e-com site and what have you, because I could do my product launches. Again, I told you powder didn't become that good because I just was enamored with my Dreamwater powder and what it could do in Amazon and my own website. I enjoyed that. And most importantly, while I would get a lot of data from Walgreens or CVS or Walmart primarily, and I would synthesize it and understand it, the feedback, be it both in the data and then the customer feedback and the interactions, because I don't own the customer at Walgreens. Walgreens does. I have no way to communicate with that customer outside of standing in a store and saying, why did you buy Dreamwater? But when it's digital, even on Amazon, but when it's digital, not entirely, I can control that communication. It's me. I control that customer. And what that meant to me was that I can learn faster, both in the actual results of the data, like what's working, what isn't. Digital marketing efforts are completely tied to actual revenue. You would not do a $10,000, $100,000 TV spot and see what happens in the data. You would do $100 a day on Facebook, and then you go to $150, then you go to $200 a day. And until your math and your return breakdowns work, I mean, I love that about digital marketing. And you can't digitally market something if you don't have a repository of sending them to my Amazon page or my own website to capture that customer in that interaction. So you could learn there. You could learn for product development. A lot of my product development came about because I was talking to people. I intentionally routed a lot of customer service, or certain customer service, think about this for a second, to me as a CEO. Obviously, low value activity is handling customer service and responding, but I did it in a way where I can listen. It became a listening tool for me. So I can either ask questions, not let it be as it stands, and all that stuff. So that one-on-one interaction, the digital interaction, actually informed my innovation strategy, my product development strategy, and all of that stuff. And then no matter what I thought about was a good idea or not, if I put it online, for argument's sake, because I didn't have to wait for resets or review periods, I can learn about it faster and what people think positively or negatively, and then do something with it. Anyway, so for a million reasons, although it was easier because of the cost of digital marketing in today's day and age, it was easier to some degree to start your brand online in 2012, 13, 14, in that range, maybe even 15, than it is today, because there's so much more competition, so much more saturation. But if I was starting Dreamwater today, I'd be digitally native, and I would focus on digital, and I would focus on maybe other platforms digitally, like I said, Amazon, not just my own website, and how they can interact with each other, well before I even thought about Walgreens or Walmart or whatever, because you also need the human resources side of your equation. Look, you need digital marketers if you're doing digital marketing stuff. You need real world retail salesmen if you're doing real world retail salesman stuff. So your organization has to match what you're trying to do on the front end to generate, your revenue. And so for a million reasons that really are about learning, being able to understand your spends better and all that stuff, I am 100% a fan of digitally native, and don't even think about Walmart or Walgreens or or the like for a very long time. The only consideration I would say if you're digitally native to consider is think about what specialty channels could look like for you. And again, make this mean whatever it means to your business and your industry, even if you're in tech. So when I was in the airports, like I would do digitally native, but for a product like Dreamwater, all hands on deck to get into those airport contracts because it was the best thing I did from a marketing perspective because it's very close to a usage occasion. In LAX, in Los Angeles, we're the #1 health and beauty item in the entire store of Hudson News, in the entirety of their Hudson News. Think about that for a second. Better than Johnson & Johnson, better than Procter & Gamble, better than all of them. I'm on the front ends. And if you're in LA, a lot of flights are red eyes coming back eastbound in the United States, or even if you go west, your shortest westbound flight from LA is called Hawaii, 4 hours away. So wherever you are, a natural sleep aid really made that travel a lot better. And that's why it was so impactful for me. So whatever your specialty, imagine when you, and it did happen with hotels or whatever, when you would show up at a hotel, if there was a Dreamwater sitting by your bed and you're a little cracked out because you're not in your bed or you just came in from wherever you flew in or whatever, that to me is a real world retail activity, but it's different than Walmart, Walgreens and the like, or 7-Eleven. That was really marketing that has a sales component. And it just, again, how open your mindset is to understanding that there are certain functions that you could do that might be revenue generating, but really are accretive to brand building like that isn't going to disrupt what you're really doing, which is being a digitally native brand.
Do you have time to answer one more?
Yes, ma'am.
This is all gold. I can't stop. Okay. Last question. So how did you keep focused on your company while in the process of selling the company? How did you find that balance?
I'm superhuman. I don't recommend it. And I certainly don't recommend you being your own attorney, even if you have the capabilities of doing so, because sometimes you got to have a good guy, bad guy kind of scenario here. Usually the attorney's the asshole. There's a reason why attorneys are asshole. Usually attorneys are assholes because in theory, I have to stay working with the people that acquire me, so you can't beat them up so badly, right? You want to be able to blame it. Oh yeah, my attorney's a dick. Sorry, I'll talk to him. I'll get it around. But by the time I layered in my attorney, because I don't do things exactly by the book, this wasn't on purpose. It was just how it rolled out. My attorney was a good guy and I was the asshole. So I don't recommend that. But the other thing is that my right-hand man in life is a woman, and she's also my controller. And I know who my controller is. She's basically my entire adult life has had her in it. And there's implicit trust and all that stuff, whatever, but I also know that she'll talk. And I said to her, on this and what we're trying to do here, there is no communicating, because if you recall, one of the things that I said I didn't want to have happen was, to some degree, it's okay if I'm interrupted. At least in that moment in time of my business, it was okay if I was being interrupted a little bit. Again, I turned around a 17-page due diligence checklist with a prepped, organized data room by myself, because I was able to do it, tagged to the different line items, whatever, while I was in Chicago for a Walgreens meeting, right? And that was the sacrifices that I choose to make. But I was very clear. I'm going to Chicago. I'm not staying in Miami to do my due diligence checklist or whatever, and I'll do it from there, right? And so it was very much close-knit. And if you would have been able to hear the video or see the video of me telling my company, one of the acknowledgments that I have in there is I said, Natalie, I believed you, but I really did not believe that you didn't say anything to anybody here. Because the minute that you would have said something to one person, it would have looked that way. And just for whatever it's worth, ahead of having auditors from Deloitte, was the auditing firm and consulting firm, whatever, that's putting together the diligence. They were really the diligence firm for the acquirer. And Deloitte's a huge consulting agency. See, I knew that Deloitte was going to show up here. And so I had already crafted a story internally saying, I'm looking for a new round of financing, or whatever. And therefore these guys are going to, you might hear or see things. So I put out a plausible story that if Natalie was asking for a certain report or for my data analyst to run something, it wasn't weird. I had already set up that I was doing stuff for a potential capital raise, which I have done multiple times during my journey. It hadn't been for years, but I had done it multiple times so that none of that would be weird. And that's really how I managed it. That's not the best one to go out on, but you want to ask me one more?
Well, you compartmentalizing, I know a lot of people have that as a skill set, but the stress of that while maintaining growth, because I think your example of all the things that happened that could have gone wrong and your dad not even believing the deal was going to close. How does a founder mentally find the strength, especially when you're not telling the company and your partners or your team, what's happening and that you're going through diligence. I think if you have advice for entrepreneurs thinking they might go through an acquisition, how do they think through time management, emotional management? What advice would you give to entrepreneurs?
It's all about your mindset. It's not even the time management. And the way I hear you say this is like, it's so complicated. And it's so hard. And how do you juggle all these things and whatever? I mean, compartmentalization and being clear on what you're doing and how, and, you know, a realistic understanding that humans like to talk to each other and we're all in close proximity, whatever. That's what allowed me to compartmentalize. By the way, it doesn't mean that I wasn't talking about it with people. I just didn't want it to touch anything that could be anybody related to Dreamwater, including my vendors and stuff like that. I wasn't indicating shit because I didn't want to have to start to have those conversations or all of a sudden have to start to put out fires like people potentially looking for a job or assuming that they're going to get a certain amount of money and starting to ask me about the bonus. That would have been distracting to me. That would have been a real problem. I did have, like I said, mentors and certain key investors or my own family, but that happened to be, not because they're my family, that happened to have beneficial experience sharing with me, that they were my sounding board for little bits and pieces, but I wasn't spending too much time on that. I understood that I had finite amount of hours in the day. I did things like telling my significant other at the time, my girlfriend, like communicating with my kids and my ex-wife and whatever, all these things that I wrote, that I talked about in here, letting them know that this is not work as usual. And yes, I'm a workaholic or whatever, but letting them know this is what I'm going through. This is why it's so important to me in this moment in my life, and getting the buy-in from them so that, again, it's one less headache or one potential problem that I don't have to waste an hour arguing that when I get home at night at whatever hour, that my girlfriend's going to rip my head off. Like, where were you? And what are you doing? Including expressing the importance of it to me in my life, to being able to see this thing through. When you have that kind of buy-in, I didn't have to waste an hour fighting. I didn't have to waste mind share or time fighting. Why did I get home so late? Why I left you dinner and it's cold? You know, any of those things, which you're not even including when you ask me that question, Susan, but those are all things that happen in the real world. And so it's like that. It's about minimizing it, not just for the interruptions, because the interruptions, I can handle it. I went into this saying, I'm superhuman. I can handle it. I couldn't handle it if I had to start to answer too many questions, either in my personal life or in my professional life. Does that make any sense? And that's how you can compartmentalize it. And, you know, and then you pick very few people that you will interact with, so you don't have to repeat your story and where you are in your sales process or what have you. So it tended to be that whoever I kind of spoke to at the beginning of this thing, they were like a little bit of my sounding board. What do you think of this? What do you think about that? My attorney was a sounding board, without having to spend time to recreate the whole story and bring you up to speed on the little details and little nuances that was going on during all of this. And that's how you do it.
All right, one last question. If you hadn't been acquired at that point, where do you think you would be right now? Do you think you would have been preparing for it by now? Had you thought about the kind of acquisition you were trying to achieve before this all happened?
Dreamwater should have been, for a million reasons, way bigger, financially speaking, than it was. Even I say that with a good exit, okay? It should have gone onto that hockey stick growth curve and stayed there, you know, sort of for several years. And that would have been a hell of a lot of fun, I think. I don't know what that would have made me by way of an experienced entrepreneur, because when things kind of go the right way, even with a lot of hard work and diligence, you think that you're a genius. It ain't you, right? You know, it's you plus your team, plus a variety of factors, your family, your support system, your friends. Let's start there. Maybe it's not you. There was you plus a lot of other things and people that had to get you to where you went to when you have that exit. And I should acknowledge this. If anybody's going through this, first of all, I would start with a congratulations. That is an amazing place to be. You know, to even be able to have that kind of a conversation or idea. But it really is very much of this group effort. Repeat the crux of the question, because I did want to make a point there. Repeat it.
Where do you think Dreamwater would have been?
Oh, would have been
acquired. Yeah.
So the truth is, you know, and I hate it because I've also taken the last couple of years investing the proceeds of the sale and doing that kind of stuff, and all of that. And I got to tell you, it is almost an immediate turnoff when I want to understand it and hear it, maybe. But it's an immediate turnoff when I have an entrepreneur pitching me their business and their idea and also explaining to me their exit strategy. Number one, because I'm a 9+ year overnight success. I promise you, none of you model 9 years out. Okay. So I don't know where or when but the key is to be ready so that when opportunity presents itself, you're able to pounce. I was very organized, not with this idea that I'm going to sell someday or have to do diligence or to do all that stuff. I was very organized for me. By the way, in the real world, I'm not organized. If this was my real desk, I'd show you, I hate papers because papers end up cluttering my desk. In my real life, I'm not that organized. But in my digital life, on my computer, I'm crazy organized. In my email, I'm pretty organized. So the idea and why I say that is because you should always be ready to transact, be it to raise money, to sell your business, to acquire another business or what have you. But there's no straight line. And usually people don't last 9 years to get to that successful point, which is why this perseverance idea really sort of matters. And you can't build toward an exit. So what would I be doing today with Dreamwater? I don't know. I probably would have launched a lot more products than them. I would have been much more successful, even with a lot less cash than they are. And I would have been way stronger digitally. They did not believe me because they were enamored by saying that we're in 30,000 doors in the United States with Walgreens and Walmart because they were a publicly traded company. They like to say we're in Walmart and Walgreens and CVS. And I kept telling them that's not where the business is. But what did I know, you know? And so I had this whole digital ecosystem I was building that I got to tell you, if they would have allowed me to actually execute that, I didn't care about my title. I would have stuck on with Dreamwater just to see if my thought processes, if I could have done what I thought made logical sense to me. In other words, I wanted to get really into the execution of this whole digital ecosystem. And if I wouldn't have been acquired, that's what I would have been doing, just executing on my digital ecosystem. And if somebody would have acquired me along the way, God bless. And if not, no. The only other wrinkle would have been, because they're publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, the TSC, those cannabis companies cannot touch cannabis products in areas where it's federally illegal. And sleep is one of the biggest need states for cannabis. So in other words, people will take cannabis, medically speaking, not medically because you have a med card, but medicinally, therapeutically, you'll take cannabis not to just smoke and hang out with your buddies or whatever, not just socially. As you get a little bit older, you tend to use cannabis to go to sleep. Sleep is a big need state for cannabis. And so that was the other area that I really would have wanted to push into. But they haven't, even though they're a cannabis company in Canada, edibles haven't been delineated. The rules for how do you do edibles in Canada, or maybe they are now, but you know, I'm not fully up to speed there. But at the time they weren't delineated. So you couldn't do consumer products. You could just sell basically flower up in Canada. And here in the US, they can't touch a green Dreamwater, a cannabis-based Dreamwater, but I could have if I would have stayed alone. And I would have been focusing on that because I would have seen it as a big opportunity. Sleep and cannabis consumption go hand in hand in terms of need states. And I would have been pushing deeper into that and my digital ecosystem. And I would have been insanely bigger than what they are right now. They've basically done nothing tangible with it in the last 2 years, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is.
Well, I'm sure your kids are so happy that you are back in their lives at the level that you can be because you don't have the other baby hogging all the attention. And I'm really excited to see what you do next. Every time we talk, there's always something cool going on. Like right now, I know you're changing the face of education. So you let me know how we can help
Aventura, Florida. In Aventura, Florida.
Well, as usual, thank you so much for just being so honest and transparent. And I think all of us have a lot of things to think about, both inspirationally, but also just staying focused, staying heads down, great documentation, and really making sure the culture is there so that we can keep our teams grinding is the best way to put it. So thank you, David.
And Susan, if anybody reaches out and wants to either go over a specific matter or a specific issue or anything like that, you have all my contact information and I'd be glad to pay it forward.
That's so nice of you. And I hope you can join us when we meet the top 100 teams in the finals in a few months. So that could be great. We'd love to have you. Anyway, guys, we'll see you guys soon. Thanks again. Keep looking at the Slack channel for all the cool stuff we have coming up. And next Tuesday, it'll be great. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, David. That was great. Really appreciate it.
Bye.